Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Last Catch Conversations on the Columbia and Snake Rivers. I'm Marcus Harrison Green, stranger columnist and founder of the South Seattle Emerald. Today's conversation comes at a pivotal moment for all of us. In the wake of the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement, it's critical we reaffirm our commitment to solutions grounded in tribal sovereignty, science, and long term restoration. Our guest today will speak directly to that commitment and to the path forward. But before I introduce them, just a reminder that we'll have a time for audience questions near the end of the program. So please feel free to put them in the chat, as well as let us know where you are watching this wonderful program from. Now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists, and just a heads up that a more detailed bio for each of them can be found in the chat. Today, we will be speaking with Chairman Shannon Wheeler from the Nez Perce tribe, Amanda Goodin from Earth Justice, Michael Garrity from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Kate Marckworth from Yakama Nation. Thank you all for being here and for joining me today. Now, I want to start out, Chairman Wheeler, with you. The Trump administration's decision to walk away from the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement left a lot of people wondering, what now for the restoration movement? And so does this create a permanent setback, or are there still meaningful federal and local levers that can be pulled?
That's a great question. And understanding that from a tribal perspective, a sovereign perspective, that we have a relationship through the treaty making process that allows us to work with the United States of America. And so bipartisan or, regardless of who's in office, I think there's the opportunity for us to work with whoever's there. It's our obligation to do that. And so as we continue to do what it takes for the in our from our shoes in Nez Perce, that relationship has always been there. It's in existence. It was in existence in 1855, and that's still in existence today. So regardless of which administration is in office, responsibility to one another from sovereign to sovereign will always be there.
Awesome. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Is all hope is not lost, as as Chairman Wheeler so eloquently said. But yeah, anybody else want to give their 2 cents on that question?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Michael. The four Columbia River Treaty tribes, the Yakama, the Warm Springs, Umatilla, and the Nez Perce came together with Washington and Oregon and developed the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative. And the federal commitments in the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement were initial commitments in support of our vision and that Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative. And while it's really disappointing that this administration has chosen to walk away from that negotiated agreement that would have brought a lot of stability to the river and allowed us to work towards healthy and abundant salmon in a really meaningful way, those six sovereigns that came together to develop the vision are committed to that vision. And it's those sovereigns, along with other regional sovereigns and tribes, that are doing most of the implementation work on the ground in allyship with wonderful non-governmental organizations as well. And so I think all of that partnership can be built on all of that partnership that has led to the Resilient Columbia Basin in the first place remains. And so I guess I would speak to the community and say the sovereigns aren't going anywhere. We're committed to that Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, to those objectives and recommended approaches set forth there, and we're continuing to act together to advance it.
Nice. It is certainly some welcome news in a time where we need welcome news. Michael, anything that you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I'd echo what Chair Wheeler and Kate had to say, and just say, there are some setbacks to the pace of our progress and some near-term things that we could accomplish that come from the Trump administration reneging on the agreement or choosing to walk away from it. But the work that the 6 sovereigns are doing together, and beyond that, fish managers beyond the 6 sovereigns in the Columbia Basin, is I think laying the groundwork for long-term progress, regardless. And there are, this agreement wasn't our only collective tool. There are other things we can do to both get some near-term gains and lay the groundwork for future benefits. So Washington, shares the sentiment that we're still in this together.
Absolutely. Well, Amanda, I wanted to turn to you real quick. The science on salmon extinction risk is still pretty alarming. And so what do you think the public still misunderstands about the urgency and what could happen if we don't act fast enough?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Some of it has been kind of pushed up pretty aggressively recently by, I think, groups that prefer the status quo. I think what folks need to understand, a few key things that folks don't necessarily understand. First is kind of where we are now relative to where we were back at the time the treaties with the tribes were signed, back at the time we had, full, healthy, historic runs, right? The level of decline that we're looking at today is just really shocking. We've got runs that are 5%, 1%, less than 1% of their historic abundance. And that's just a terrible loss. And getting all the way back to that historic abundance would be incredible. It would be a real challenge in light of our kind of current landscape, but we can make a lot of progress relative to where we are today. So I think that bigger arc of kind of where we are relative to where we used to be is important. I think folks also don't understand how far we are away from the healthy abundance goals that have been established regionally by bipartisan regional experts. We are again at a fraction of those kind of healthy abundance goals and even interim goals that we're aiming for. So I think people need to understand that we have a long ways to go to get to where we need to be. I think I would also really want people to understand that increased abundance and healthy abundance is achievable. We have a whole suite of measures recommended by regional experts that would get us quite a lot closer, even all the way to healthy abundance. And so when people look at, where we are now relative to historic abundance, and it looks like such a gap and is maybe a little overwhelming, I don't want people to take from that all hope is lost, right? We have things that we can do. We know how to make progress. And so now it's just a question of really committing to that progress, really deciding that we're going to take the necessary actions. And I guess just the one last thing I'd put out there is, for some of the runs in the Snake River in particular that are the closest to extinction, we've been hovering at a really dangerous level for quite a while now, and are even slipping lower from there. There's something that's called the quasi-extinction threshold, right? At the point at which we just don't even know if a population can recover. The longer we kind of flirt with that level, the more likely it is that natural annual variation will just cause us to lose populations. And so, if you look at the fact that abundance has been low for a while and say, well, we're just kind of treading water. Like, no, that's the wrong way to look at it. We are really flirting with a catastrophic outcome. And so we've got to change this narrative. We've got to turn the tide very quickly. And I would hope people understand that we are running out of time to avoid extinction, avoid the worst outcome for some of these populations.
Amanda, can I add to that, Michael? I think there's one or two other key things that I think aren't widely understood and that I wish were. When people are talking about aggregate numbers, sometimes that disguises two really important things. One is that the distinction between the different stocks. So, Amanda's talking about some of those quasi-extinction thresholds. So, while we have been making progress from some of the worst days in the basin, and that's really good and that's encouraging, and it speaks to the successful efforts that have been advanced by folks like the six sovereigns and the tribes in particular. But we also are still needing to address the balance between hatchery and wild fish. And so, understanding the dynamics of those numbers. I think some of the upper Columbia stocks, I wish people knew, I think I'm glad, growing awareness of the dire straits that the Snake River stocks are in, but it's not exclusive to the Snake. We have upper Columbia stocks that are hitting what's called their significant decline indicators, some triggers, warning triggers that they are trending in the wrong direction and moving it in that way as well. And then finally, I think for, representing a tribal client, it's also about fish and nets. And so we need to also understand that the whole basin and the health of the stocks across the basin can really impact whether or not tribal fishermen are able to exercise those treaty rights that they reserved. Not that were granted to them, but they reserved in those treaties back in 1855. And when we have stocks that are doing so poorly, we have to restrict fishing on the stocks where we have been really successful in helping to rebuild. And that's really frustrating for our tribal fishermen. They see those stocks, they have to watch those fish go past in order to preserve, rightly, the stocks that are still really struggling. And our tribal fishermen reserved the right to have a successful living, right, based on this fishery. That was a way of life. It was also an economic way of life, as well as a cultural way of life. And so we are not seeing the fulfillment of those treaty commitments. Our tribal fishermen are not able to access those runs. And so we need to not only understand the status of the stocks, but the status of our access to those stocks as well.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, I would like to turn to you as Kate already alluded to. We know that restoring salmon runs isn't just about one river, it's about an entire ecosystem. So can you share how Washington is coordinating across agencies and states to ensure that dam removal actually results in real recovery? And can you walk us through any local studies that are being conducted right now and might be completed soon?
Yeah. So Washington's working closely with other states and tribes in managing, both sort of contributing sort of our voice to dam operations decisions that are ultimately controlled by federal agencies, but they have some forums where we all can provide our input on a sort of day by day and seasonal basis. But yeah, it's about the health of the Columbia Basin as a whole. Washington and Oregon are both at the mouth of the river, and the lower Snake River and Upper Columbia run through Washington. So, our state has a big interest in fish that come back and spawn in Washington, but also the fish that swim through the rivers that are headed to just the remarkably intact, high elevation, climate resilient habitat that's up in central Idaho and the Salmon River Basin and in northeast Oregon and the Grand Ronde, Grand Ronde is also a little bit in Washington, and some of its tributaries are there. But anyway, so that's, we're looking. We have to tackle this issue with a lot of we've always needed regional leadership. Right now, we really need regional leadership. And then as far as studies, like one thing that comes to mind is some work that one of WDFW's scientists, Andrew Murdoch, has been doing on some of the nuances of adult steelhead migration through the system, and how much adult steelhead will, either to seek cool water or because they're just wanting to check out different parts of the river, they're swimming above dams that are not designed to pass them back downstream to the tributary where they that they want to return to. So you might see a fish going exploring up into the Methow or Okanagan above 9 dams on the Columbia and wanting to get back down to the Yakama or Snake to actually spawn. And you might see a fish from the mid Columbia, like the Yakama, go up into the Lewiston area or something, and up in Shannon's neck of the woods and then they need to get back down. So we need to be managed. That's sort of a new thing. We've realized that we need to provide a mechanism for those adult steelhead to safely get back downstream. And it's been pretty interesting to see Andrew's work on that.
Gotcha. And any other takers on that question? Or?
I just wanted to ask, Marcus, I wasn't sure if your question was also directed at some of Washington's studies on replacement services for the lower Snake River dams, or whether you were looking more to what kind of Michael spoke to on the science and what the fish need to recover.
Oh no, you can definitely speak up about the former here.
Yeah, I just give a quick update on those, and I'd encourage Michael to jump in and and add. But I think Washington and the federal government agreed to complete a set of really detailed studies and plans for how to replace the services of the lower Snake River Dam, so that we can, so that breaching can become an option, right? So we can go to Congress with that ask. And they're all kind of in different places. There's a study of water supply that is very close to complete. Well, I guess I'll preface this all by saying we're not really expecting federal partnership anymore in these studies, which is a huge disappointment. But we've been so impressed with Washington's commitment to carry these studies forward. There is state legislation directing Washington or committing Washington to do these studies. And, Washington has shown great willingness to carry these forward, even without the federal partnership and the federal funding that was promised. There's a water supply study that's nearly complete. There is a study of transportation that's moving forward. That was always predominantly a state study and is expected to be complete at the end of 2026. There's a study on recreation and public access that I think is there's gonna need to be a bit more conversation because of the way the federal state partnership worked there. So I think it's a little less certain without the federal partnership, kind of what the timeline and substance of that one will be. And similarly, there's an energy study that things are a little more up in the air with the potential absence of a federal partner on that study. Michael, I would welcome any additions that you have.
No, I appreciate you hearing the question as intended, since I may not have. But yeah, no, I think Washington is committed to finishing these as we can under less than ideal circumstances, and feeding them into appropriate federal processes, as soon as they reemerge. So yeah.
Got it. Well, for this next question, I'd like to get feedback from Chairman Wheeler and Kate. In preparation for this discussion, I was talking to a young activist from Gen Z, and nothing against the Gen Zers, but this person was kind of like, why can't these things be done like right now? Like why can't this happen and be fixed right now, almost instantaneously? And I'm wondering, Chairman Wheeler and Kate, you've both been part of the struggle for decades, and so can you share some lessons from past efforts, whether they were wins, whether they were setbacks, but through the trials and tribulations? Can you share some lessons that the next generation of advocates should carry forward?
Sure, I guess I can go. Or I could go ladies first with Kate if she'd like to go. But, there are a lot of lessons that we've learned through this experience and process. Many of the things, you go to school and you take lessons, and then you take a test. In life, we take the test, and then we learn the lessons from those tests that we've been a part of. And so as we think about the efforts that have gone on throughout for decades, and for tribal nations in particular, that the things that we've experienced. And it's more than just about fishing here. It's more than just about returning fish. And uh, um, so the impacts to us, we can express those in places that they need to be expressed. And being able to have open conversations, whether it's with Bonneville Power Administration or the Port of Lewiston or Northwest River Partners, and meeting with these people in person, I think are having to re-educate sometimes about the obligations that the United States of America has, and then for us and as Perce have with the United States of America through that treaty making process. So a lot of times we're having to re-educate. So that's just an ongoing thing. But as we looked at the things that have been done through salmon recovery efforts, particularly in the lower Snake River, in the Snake River system that you mentioned, the central Idaho, northeast Oregon. Well, you're talking all Nez Perce territory there. And that was Michael, I believe, mentioned that. And then, of course, we have our fishing rights on the Columbia River, too, as well. The things that, when we've tried so many different things to get these ESA listed species, as was mentioned before, there's numbers that are put on a screen, and it says the salmon runs are returning at triple the amount of what they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago. A lot of those aren't ESA listed stocks. They're not the lower Snake River fish that are in peril right now. A lot of these are hatchery fish, and a lot of them are in the upper Columbia too, and so they don't have the listings that they do in the lower Snake River. And so having to educate that, but also speaking the truth on numbers and understanding that some of the information that's put out there by it could be Northwest River Partners, it could be any of the advocates out there that are advocating for keeping the dams in place. They support recovery, but a lot of times they don't put the information that we as salmon managers, as salmon people, provide. And I think the relationship that we have with the United States of America, and what the previous administration was willing to do in honor of that, was something that we would look for this administration to do the same thing, and to honor that, and to have those conversations directly with the tribes to ensure that they understand the position and the relationship that we have to one another. And so as we continue to move forward, we have to continue to educate. Those efforts are always ongoing. We have to continue to speak the truth, and to ask our adversaries to speak the truth too, as well. And if their numbers that they provide to us are something that we need to consider for putting ourselves in their shoes, I would request the reciprocity happen too, as well, from their perspective, that they look at the science that we provide. And so if we're able to do that, these conversations can continue through this administration. And I think that's really where we're headed at Nez Perce, is that we want to continue to have these conversations with the administration, whether it's whatever's left of NOAA and BPA and Army Corps of Engineers. These are the directions that we're looking at of going. And so honoring that treaty, and the understanding that the Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, and the rule of law still applies to this relationship.
Chair Wheeler, you're always hard to follow, but maybe a couple of additional thoughts to build on some of the great themes you raise. In this work, Michael, you're sort of talking about the decades-long arc, and I think I've only had the privilege and the honor of serving Yakama Nation for the past 12 years. But I know that Yakama Nation has been asserting its treaty fishing rights in the courts and playing defense there, even since before the state of Washington was a state, in the territorial courts back in the day. And so there's a long history there that I have the privilege of learning from and helping to advance. But I guess I would speak to your Gen Z friend and say that these issues require both defense and offense. And to Chair Wheeler's point, long-term solutions to complex problems, particularly that are geographically complex, that are scientifically complex, that involve a solution that needs to be accepted and stabilized by a broad region. That takes work and advocacy on a number of different fronts. It takes work in the courtrooms. It takes work with policymakers. It takes work in our communities. And for durable solutions, we need to not ignore any of those spaces. And, I think the tribes and the NGOs in the arc of sort of looking at the Columbia Basin's fisheries and defending tribal rights and the health of those fisheries, we've seen a lot of wins in the courtroom. And yet we are still facing the declines that we're facing. And so I think coming together, not only to make sure we're playing defense and preventing further declines and affirming the rights and the obligations of various parties under statute, that's really important. But it's also really important for us to come together and do that proactive work and to get buy-in for our comprehensive vision. And I'll end on an optimistic note, which is that our region is facing a number of huge changes right now. And with huge change comes risk, but also great opportunity. And I think all of the sovereigns that came together to develop the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative saw the real opportunity to address our region's energy needs and deal with aging infrastructure across the spectrum of our region in a way that also tried to redress some of the harms and the ways in which those pieces of our communities were done poorly and done in environmentally and socially unjust ways in the past, in a manner that's creating a lot of both historic and continuing injustice in communities like tribal fishing communities. So I think there is a real opportunity. And just for example, the amount of energy we'd need to replace for the lower snake dams is a fraction of the energy our region needs overall. Addressing infrastructure issues is something all of us are grappling with across our region. And so addressing the maintenance backlogs and infrastructure issues at our aging hatchery facilities can be thought of within that broader landscape. These are all ways that we can come together with others who have similar interests to build comprehensive solutions.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for the words of wisdom and squeezing out a few ounces of optimism there as well. Well, Amanda, I want to direct this next question at you, and then I'd be curious to see what Michael has to say as well. But with so many competing interests, energy, agriculture, fish, and tribal rights, how do we make sure that environmental justice and indigenous leadership aren't treated as optional as we move forward in this movement?
Thanks, Marcus. Respectfully, since it's a question about Indigenous leadership, I did want to see if Chair Wheeler and Kate Marckworth wanted to speak to it first.
After you, Chair Wheeler.
Yeah, we'll go with the most affected and then the allies after. So.
Okay, I think it's the partnerships that we have and the understanding of the relationship of tribes to land and the what we call Tamalwit, or the unwritten laws of the land, of nature, that were here written upon the land before any of the Natitawit or human beings were here. We respect that, we live with that, we honor that. And a lot of the injustices that have happened by the change of the I guess by human change, if we're looking at the Columbia River system of operations, for instance, in the Industrial Revolution, of the things in agriculture communities, things that impact the water, then impact the environment. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. And how can we do things better moving forward? And so as was mentioned before, you know, the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement was a improving and taking the Northwest into the future. You know, more energy needs, of course, meeting those needs and utilizing energy in a different manner. And the rest of it, you know, the transportation, irrigation, recreational uses, those all have impacts on the environment. So, but understanding the relationship of salmon to the rivers, to the land itself, the relationship to the Puget Sound, to Salish Sea, to the Orca, I think, you know, seeing how those are tied together and understanding from a perspective of indigenous knowledge, but also of the science that we know of today, and the relationship of how to live with that land coming together, I think is the biggest piece where these environmental injustices can be addressed by changing the future of the Pacific Northwest that the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement was set to do. And, you know, whether it's been the rescission on that is taking that back, but, you know, well, then what's the answer? You know, the answer isn't status quo, because that doesn't fix anything. That just keeps things in place. So as they are, and so we know that there are issues. You know, whether you call them climate change or whether you call them impacts to the land, they're still happening, and they're still happening into these salmon that migrate and are supposed to be coming back and aren't in the numbers that they should be. And so the mitigation factors that have gone into this still haven't done what they should be doing. And so I guess it's a long answer for tying this together of the environmental injustices that have happened. But the collective knowledge that we do have now, and the technologies that we have, and ability to be able to change the way that we do things needs to happen. And if it isn't in the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement, any analysis that were being conducted by the state of Washington, then what is the answer? And we need to continue to push for what we felt was an answer that was going to address these environmental injustices and tribal injustices that have happened over a century now.
Yeah, Kate, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly that I think it starts with coordinated, fearless leadership together by the states and the tribes, supported by our communities and our NGO allies, that, you know, recognizes that ecological and cultural resiliency have to be embraced as key components of how we plan for economic prosperity and stability, rather than having ecological and cultural resiliency becoming a casualty of economic prosperity. And so, you know, I think that work is appropriate for sovereigns to do together, to set parameters, right? That's what sovereigns do. We plan long range, and we do that for the benefit of our entire community, trying to not allow only a small fraction to become winners in our communities. And so I think that hard work begins with the sovereigns and needs to be seen as valuable and upheld by our communities who elect our leaders.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, I will return to you now.
Yeah, I think where we have that strong affirmative Indigenous leadership, that vision for a win-win solution where we kind of hold tribal treaty obligations and support a thriving region, then I think there's a clear role for advocates and for communities to support that vision, to amplify that vision, and where there are decisions that are unlawful and inconsistent with that vision, then we can hold decision makers accountable.
And I would just add that I think we have a lot of sort of legal support that Congress and states have passed that endorses salmon recovery, and part of that is meeting treaty rights. And I'd also say that when you see, just sort of a personal observation, seeing Senator Murray in recent years really leaning into some of these issues. She got reelected by a wide margin. Representative Simpson in Idaho on the other side of the aisle really leaned into these issues, got elected by a wide margin. It seems compatible with successful for political leadership, and I don't think anybody's going to get punished for trying to do the right thing electorally by trying to do the right thing for salmon and treaty rights and environmental justice.
Yeah. Well, one can definitely hope. I'll say that. Well, before we move on to the audience Q&A, just a reminder for the audience to please, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I will do my best to get to it before we wrap up here. But I want to ask you this, and I hope everybody can chime in. You know, any type of movement work can feel overwhelming, and it's easy for folks to burn out. And so I want to ask each of you, how do you stay grounded and motivated? And also, what gives you hope when it comes to the future of the Columbia Basin? And Chairman Wheeler, I guess I'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, I think, you know, when we look at our young children, and then we try to open our vision to those yet to come, is always for tribal nations and tribal members, ourselves here, to be able to work towards that. An example is, you know, in the capitalistic system, I would invest my money into something that I would expect to see a return on in my time. Well, our time, you know, as tribal nations, we think towards the future, and, you know, I guess being able to afford to buy green bananas and let them ripe, you know, sometimes is something that we can do. In this case here, though, where salmon are at the threshold now of extinction, ESA listed species in the lower Snake River, you know, we find strength in a lot of different places. I was at the South Fork of the Salmon River this weekend, Saturday. This is my 10th year on council. This is the first year I went fishing in 10 years. I caught 3 salmon, had to recharge myself. I had to be in the water. I had to be in the gravel. I had to, be on the hillside, getting hatoto, wild tobacco. You know, for me personally, I go to the sweat lodge, and, you know, those are the places that I thank the Creator for the blessings that we receive. You know, I ground myself there in what we call Wastitamo, the Mother Earth, or the sweat lodge itself. And what we do is it's just a connecting ourselves back to what we call to the womb of our mother. The earth is our mother, and by going into the sweat lodge, we're reconnecting ourselves, we're grounding ourselves, and, you know, we're ensuring that the trail that we're on, you know, we understand where we've been, and we understand the trail before us, and it helps us in that manner. And so when I think about those things where I recharge and how I recharge, you know, it's exercising in those areas that were reserved, and those things that we have as a tribal nation to be able to access, to feel that sense of freedom that we have when we're out in the landscape, enjoying those things, and listening to songs. And I guess that type of interaction is what really grounds me, what really keeps me where I need to be, and it really reinvigorates me to know that when I look at the small children that are around the community and are in our community within our tribal nation, that it's those people that we're doing what we're doing, the things for, and the relationship to the land, and the obligations that we have, and the stories that we carry, and that we know, you know, it all aligns for us. And so that's how we keep our strength going, and we'll continue to keep that strength and moving forward until we see this thing through.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Chairman Wheeler. You also gave me a couple of places to go to for my own self-care routine, so I appreciate the tips. Kate, what about you?
Yeah, I think what Chair Wheeler is saying about, reconnecting with the places we live, with the places our food comes from. I think for me, that has been a real amazing personal benefit of doing this work and learning from the community that I'm serving. Um, and just, I had never caught a fish before I had this job. And, I think one of the most special experiences that really helps to reconnect me with my sense of optimism in this work is going in the fall to a particular place where we can come and see the salmon that are coming back, and those are reintroduced salmon. They had been extirpated, and the acclimation restored those salmon. And so to get to see that each fall gives me hope that we can do this work successfully. And taking my kids to see that helps me to reconnect, both for me and for my next generation, with the place we're living in.
That's amazing. Amanda, what about you?
I guess I would add that I feel so lucky to be working with such an incredible, talented and dedicated group of colleagues in this work. And I see so many people fighting so hard around me to bring this vision to reality, to keep making progress and moving us forward despite the obstacles that we're facing. And, it can be daunting seeing the headwinds, especially at the federal level, that we face now. But I mean, the idea of giving up or stepping away is just unfathomable when I have folks shoulder to shoulder with me who are pushing so hard for this and who I respect so much. So I think that really helps keep me moving forward in this time, especially.
Awesome. What about you, Michael?
I'll sort of a plus one for the value of the great colleagues and relationships and support for each other through difficult times is really important. The other thing, and then in my own way, sort of getting out and seeing the places that these fish come from and how they connect the region, and thinking about how some of these fish fight up through 8 or 9 dams, up both industrialized and wild rivers, gaining 7,000 feet of altitude through crazy rapids after they've already gone like 900 miles. They stuff keeps coming at them and they keep going. And so I think that we can take inspiration from the keystone species that we're trying to protect, and they've survived all that stuff over millennia. We can do our part and keep at it in the face of our this weird world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, certainly. I have to say that in comparison to the journalism community that I'm a part of, you all have the most healthiest coping mechanisms. So bravo to all of you. That being said, we are going to get into our audience Q&A, and I will, again, like as I said, I will try to get through as many as I possibly can before we wrap up. And here is the first question. It says, Dan Newhouse, Congressman from Washington's 4th Congressional District, has been campaigning hard to keep the Snake River dams and is now saying that increasing electricity needs for AI requires that dams be kept. What is the best way to counter the misinformation coming from people like Representative Newhouse?
I'd like to take a shot at that one if I could.
Yeah,
I just think there's many different things that we could do. Conservation, of course, is always one of energy, and it should be looked at as a benefit for how we meet those needs of the future. Another thing is to how and when we utilize energy. Energy costs, I think, the least amount in the Pacific Northwest. The hydro energy that's being produced here, about 50% of the energy we utilize is hydro. But we look across the nation, and there's a lot more. The energy bills are a lot higher than here in the Pacific Northwest. But when we look at the types of energy that we have, the potential portfolio that we have, and we don't utilize that to its fullest, we don't, we should be utilizing wind when it's here. We should be utilizing solar, battery storage when it's here. And I think, combining those things and renewable energies that are out there and the non-renewable energies, they all need to be utilized in a manner that is prolonging the use of those non-renewable energies. And so the renewable energies that are here on a daily basis, I was told, I've seen a fact that for 1.5 hours of the day that the sunlight strikes the earth, that's enough to power the global energy needs for one full year in an hour and a half. I know trees and plants and everything, we need that energy too, that is being produced by solar. But, we need to look at energy differently and how we utilize it and when we utilize it. So I think those are some things moving forward, and projections are exactly that, projections. And, there's a history of projections coming from the inceptions of the dams and the growth of the Pacific Northwest. And I just think we need to, utilize what we have at our fingertips. But at the same time, I think, state of Washington may need to, kind of go back on their AI legislation that they have and how much they allow here in the Pacific Northwest based on other issues.
Yeah, anybody else want to chime in, or shall we move to the next question?
You can go. I think agree with what Chair Wheeler said, and I think Kate really put her finger on it earlier when she said, when she was talking about how when things are changing quickly, there's opportunity to nest within that change and put your needs in that bigger picture. And when whether we're going to end up at the low end of the range of future energy needs or high end, it's going to be a lot. And the amount that it would take to, for instance, replace the lower Snake River dams and provide other hydro system flexibility is not really that daunting in context. So I would point that out. I would also point out that, that the agreement that we had with the Biden administration and the Murray-Inslee recommendations are also really clear about, you're trying to replace any lost benefits and ensure continuity of services before big changes are made to the dams. There's everybody in this coalition was very respectful of the need to do that and acknowledged it. And that's and I think sometimes the opposition to our approach willfully ignores sort of the obvious pragmatic element of what we've been talking about here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the next question that I have for y'all, it says, looking ahead to the next federal and state budget cycles, what specific appropriation or rider milestones should advocates be targeting in the coming 12 to 18 months to keep Columbia Basin restoration on track? Okay. Kate, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me remember some of the detail here, but writ large, I think we are super concerned about important budgets coming out of Department of Commerce for NOAA, for example, the Mitchell Act budgets. We're concerned about making sure that the PACSER funding is coming through. We need to make sure that the existing funding that has been critical for Columbia Basin salmon, steelhead, and other native fisheries restoration and mitigation are not gutted. For too long, we have been seeing most of the conversation in the region focused on, are we doing enough to keep fish that are already listed from going extinct, or to keep fish from being listed. The Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative really tried to change that narrative arc to how do we get back to healthy and abundant salmon. And so if anything, we need to be moving in the opposite direction, increasing the level of funding for fish restoration in the basin. And we're really concerned that things are trending in the opposite bad direction. So our Mitchell Act funding is critical. Our PACSTR funding is critical. The staffing issues are also a big one, actually. Our U.S. Fish and Wildlife hatcheries in the Columbia Gorge complex are really feeling the pinch of staffing issues right now. For example, at Warm Springs Hatchery, we've only got one person trying to operate that hatchery, which is simply not sustainable. And so the states and the tribes are trying to pinch hit to help those federal employees there. So if they're looking for specific things to raise awareness about, the funding for key programs and is a big one, but also the staffing issues is a big one. Colleagues, any other specificity you'd add there?
Maybe the only thing I'd add is that I think that we could do follow-up and provide lists of sort of particular, line items that we're asking for as the Six Sovereigns group. And I'll also add that this is one area where there's been really broad support across, into like the river user industry, and the Columbia Basin Collaborative and others have echoed what the Six Sovereigns asked for. So hopefully that will help on the Republican side of the aisle, sort of, speaking of Congressman Newhouse, he and others on that side of the aisle could do a lot to sort of keep some of these basic programs alive and push back on the Trump administration and their Office of Management and Budget as they're seeking to zero out some of these programs.
Yeah, I mean, looks like we have so many great questions than we have time for, but I'll ask this one here. It says, with several key NEPA and ESA reviews on the docket this year, which decision deadline should our coalition be watching most closely, and how can grassroots voices most effectively shape those outcomes?
I'll take a crack at that. I'm not totally sure I understand all pieces of the question, but I'm assuming folks are looking to kind of the decision documents governing operation of the hydro system and some of the uncertainties surrounding that in light of some of the kind of regulatory flux we're currently seeing. I think I would say that as new decisions kind of come available for public comment, it is incredibly important for people to make their voice heard and make it known that they support healthy and abundant salmon in the Columbia Basin. They believe that's achievable, and they want decisions that move us in that direction. I'd invite others to chime in as well. It's a little hard without knowing which decisions folks are asking about.
I think from a tribal perspective here, we have treaties, and treaties, of course, are a narrow column. Underneath that is treaty reserved rights, which are broader, that the federal government must uphold. And there are statutory authorities that have developed not only the federal action agencies, but also ESA, NEPA, those as well, to uphold the responsibilities, these broader trust responsibilities that speak to the exact treaty rights that we're looking at. And so I think those things are in place to help support this kind of pyramid of responsibilities, and that get up to the treaty, where the treaty actually sits, and the Constitution. And so I think that when we look at it from a perspective of any rollbacks of NEPA or EPA, or ESA, then those things are in place for purpose. And I think the congressional leaders need to, definitely support those actions that they have taken in the past.
And Marcus, I guess I'd add that there's another process. It's not NEPA or ESA. It's a Northwest Power Act's call for the development of a fish and wildlife program that helps to direct federal spending for restoring fish that have been impacted by the federal hydro system. And there's an active update to that fish and wildlife program going on right now through the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. And there are opportunities that are ongoing, and in particular opportunities to comment on their draft program that'll be coming out this fall. I think tuning into those is important, and it's an important opportunity to make our community voices heard, that we want to make sure we're holding federal agencies that have obligations to protect, restore, and enhance impacted fish, that we be taking an aggressive approach towards that restoration within their mandate to provide affordable, reliable power. We should be doing everything right up till that moment to try and mitigate for these impacts. And also, there's a relationship between that fish and wildlife program and other energy planning programs that are developed by that council, and making it really clear that the people of this region support an approach that's consistent with the way the courts have interpreted the Northwest Power Act, to do that planning exercise in a way that puts uncertainties, the risk of any uncertainties in that planning process, on the power system and not on the fish. Because obviously, if we create a long-term plan for how we're going to meet our power needs, but don't leave enough space in that plan to take an aggressive range of fish operations, then that uncertainty can result in a significant fatality moment, right? Where we've not left ourselves the room to do what we need to do for the fish.
Thank you for that, Kate. Well, with us fast approaching the finish line here, I do want to wrap up on this question. The questioner says, what can be done about BPA, the Bonneville Power Association, given how they are calling for no salmon restoration numbers and claiming they have no legal obligation to recover salmon?
You want to go first,
can
Michael? I think we all have thoughts.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Kate just talked about through this Power Council process, that's where Bonneville is seeking to change the sort of the goalposts. And each state has 2 members on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. If you live in any of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, or Montana, you could write your members or their staff. You can write your governors and talk about what your priorities are for that. I will say that it's I think Washington and Oregon are in relatively good places on this. But it's, and I think it's also maybe the Bonneville Power Administration is part of the Department of Energy. They should be responsive to the public and should hear directly from their customers, individual customers, which to some degree almost everyone in the Pacific Northwest, about what your values are.
Yeah, I want to second everything that Michael said, but especially that last part. Bonneville Power Administration's customers are utilities, and the utilities customers are you all. Everyone on here has a utility, and many of those are served by BPA entirely or in large part. And make sure your utilities know that you care about this, that you support salmon recovery. And I think the other piece of that too is that Bonneville Power Administration has been responsive in the past to hard questions from members of Congress, from senators, for example. So make sure your senators know that you need Bonneville Power Administration to move in a different direction, that they should be supporting salmon recovery, and that you want them to ask those hard questions and make sure that they are actually prioritizing the key salmon rebuilding portion of their legal obligations. So people have more power than they think here. You gotta reach out and make your voice heard, and keep the pressure on them, because it's true, they're not moving in the direction we need them to.
Yeah. Anyone else before we wrap up?
think Amanda and Michael said it well, Marcus.
Yeah, well, the power of the people is always greater than the people in power, as they say. That being said, I just want to thank everyone again for taking the time to join us. Just a reminder that folks can find out about upcoming actions and events and other information at columbiasnakeriver.com. And I want to once again just thank all of our panelists and each of you for joining us today, for lifting up the urgency, the opportunity, and the truth about what's at stake. There's a lot at stake. And as you heard, this is more than just about fish. It's about honoring treaties, restoring a broken system, and building a future where salmon and people thrive together. We'll follow up with a recording, transcript, and ways to take action. And we hope you'll continue this conversation in your communities, newsrooms, offices, and everywhere. Thank you once again, and be well until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you.